Good evening. It is time for us to go ahead and jump back into our Through the Bible studies. We're actually getting close to being finished with the Old Testament at this point. That being the case, I want to start off with reminding us what are the 5 key passages of the Old Testament. Go ahead. What's the first one? All right, Genesis 3, which it's the fall, right? So sin enters into the world. This creates the problem. Joshua, you know the second one? Or is that the one you were wanting to answer? Okay, not Exodus 12. You're very close, though. It's what chapter 12? Hey, excellent. Good job, Joshua. That's right. Genesis chapter 12. And what do we find in Genesis 12? All right, the promises. All right, to Abraham. Very good. All right, what's our third one? All right, now we get into Exodus. Exodus 24, and what's there? All right. This is where they enter into their covenant with God. Where are they, by the way, when they do that? All right, they're there at Mount Sinai. Very good. All right. And then, skip ahead a little bit to our fourth one. What's that? All right, 2 Samuel chapter 7. What do we find there? All right. The promises to David. And I didn't ask this, but what were the 3 main promises to Abraham in chapter 12? Joshua? Mm-hmm. All right, nation, land. What were you going to say, Anna Lee? The same thing? All right, go ahead and say it really loud, though. Anna Lee, go ahead and say it. That's right. Very good. Nation, land, and seed. Excellent. What about 2 Samuel chapter 7? What was the main promise? Okay. An enduring dynasty. Remember, David said, I want to build you a house. God said, no, but I will build you a house. Right? All right. And then what was our 5th and final one? Someone say it. Jeremiah. All right, Jeremiah 31. You were really close. Jeremiah 31. What happens in Jeremiah 31? I heard mumbling, but I couldn't tell if it was correct or not. All right, a promise of a new covenant. And this one's going to be different from the old one. All right, excellent. Now, these are kind of the key passages. Does that mean that these are the most important passages that you'll find in the Old Testament? No. But these are the ones that kind of help us to see the flow of the narrative of the Old Testament itself. The meta-narrative that's taking place with all of the other ones that are a part of it. So that when you do study, you read through and some kind of a story, you can place it with how the story is progressing. You start with the fall in Genesis chapter 3. This creates the problem. And in order to solve the problem, God chooses one man in order to bring about his of his promises through that Abraham, who becomes a nation. That nation becomes God's covenantal people in Exodus. But through them, he then narrows down his focus once again to one individual and says, now my promise is going to flow through this guy, and that is David. And then eventually there's the hope of the new covenant to come, because the hope is no longer in that first covenant that was given. All right. Everybody sees this flow? understands what's taking place? We remember this, right? Salt shakers, right? Let me know you're with me, right? Okay. All right, excellent. So, having this reminder, and like I said, we are right at the end of the Old Testament. Let's catch ourselves up here. I don't have the full timeline up. I really want to start this timeline right here. What captivity do you think this one is that this represents, this dip? Huh? I don't have the whole timeline. I'm just going to narrow it to a certain focus this evening. So which one would you guess that one is? All right, this is Babylon. All right, so the Babylonian captivity is what's being represented right here. We would put in a guy named Josiah, his death. I'll put right here. What year did Josiah die? All right, 609, yes. So Josiah dies. Why is that important? Josiah's death. Why is that important? All right, that's right. Very good, Samuel. God had promised Josiah that all of the curses that were going to come upon them were not going to come until after his death. He dies in 609 in battle against Egypt, and this kind of starts the timeline. So, the beginning of this captivity, someone give me a year. The very first ones to come out, who comes out in 605 and is taken to Babylon? All right, Daniel. Daniel and his three friends, remember Rakshak and Benny? So 605, what's the next date? There are three of them. All right, 597. And who's taken in 597? All right, this is when Ezekiel and a lot of the artisans and important people are taken to Babylon, and they set up a whole populace in Babylon of Judeans. And then what's the final date? Seven. This is when Nebuchadnezzar comes in. He's like, I'm tired of dealing with you. This is where the last king who sits on the throne, what's his name? All right, Zedekiah. And remember Zedekiah, what happens to him? All right, they line his sons up in front of him. All of his sons are killed in front of him. Then they blind him. So that's the very last thing that he sees. And it appears that what's happened now? The last king has died, the last king is taken away. All of his sons have died. What's happened? Yeah, Joshua? Oh, yep. Man, you know what? You just nailed that one. Way to go, Joshua. That's exactly right. It appears that the line of David has come to an end, but as Joshua just said, it actually hasn't, right? Where's the hope still? Anybody remember the guy's name? Yeah, just say Jehoiakim, right? You'll get it, right? Yeah, Jehoiakim. He was taken earlier, and now he is brought out of imprisonment in Babylon. He's elevated. He and his sons are elevated, according to the way that the Talmud puts it. His sons are elevated, and now there is hope still for the seed. David's line still lives, and there is still hope. All right. So this gets us into the captivity. We talked about this last week. When does this captivity come to its end? Joshua, you have a number? No? No, not a 7 in there. Yeah, Isaac. 5 what? Not 535. You're awfully close, though. All right, 538 is when the decree comes out, lets them return. And this is pretty much where we are. We talked a little bit last week, looking at some of this history about all of the Persian emperors, the kings, and stuff like that. I don't want to reiterate and go through all of that. That's not really in a you have to know this information type of a thing. But this is now where we are at the very end of what we would call the Old Testament timeline. The stuff that's recorded, the history that we have here, this is it. We're now down to the very last little bits. In our timeline, we've already talked about, last week we brought it up, and I said we're not going to do it because we spent some time talking about Esther. In fact, we took a night to read through Esther. You guys remember doing that, right? Yeah, had a lot of fun with the noisemakers, the bells, and everything else, right? And we got to boo and cheer and all the fun stuff that you would do. So we're not going to spend time going through talking about Esther. We've done that when we talked about the Feast of Purim itself. But that would be in this area, in this post-Babylon period. And let me just look at my notes here and get a definitive date. This would be during the time frame of Ahasuerus. And it's going to be reigning. Ahasuerus or Xerxes took the throne in 486. You had the Battle of Thermopylae, I think was 480, unless I'm mistaken. And we kind of talked about that history last week. What you need, Joshua? Okay, all right. Well, in 486 is when Xerxes, or Ahasuerus, he comes to the throne. And so you had the Battle of Thermopylae, and we don't know when Esther is necessarily through this. But as I posited before, I think the beginning of Esther is before he goes off to war. And then he's saddened, and wants his queen Vashti, when he comes back, after the war effort doesn't go as well as he was hoping, and he wants to be comforted, and he can't. And I think it just makes sense that that's the description of what's going on. So, Esther, we're going to date to, I can't give a definitive, but I'm just going to put, let's see, I really, just for the sake of something, I'm just putting a number down right there. His reign goes from 486 to 465, so it's somewhere in there. With Mordecai, though, remember Mordecai is elevated in that story, and that really paves the way for what in the future, as far as political places are concerned for the Jews. What's that? Yeah, higher status, there's going to be opportunities for somebody maybe fall into high positions within the governance or the political spectrum, maybe even a Jew somewhere along the way that might be as high as a cupbearer to the king himself, something that raises the elevation of the Jewish people to a higher prominence, where they are able to be in these types of places. All right. So this brings us then to the story of Ezra. Now, one more thing that we need to put up on here that I completely skipped and I shouldn't have, and that is the rebuilding of what? That's right. Good job, Joshua. The rebuilding of the temple itself. The return came in 538, and they pretty much began to rebuild the temple. Did they finish it? Okay. All right. When a guy named Cambyses, he comes to the throne, he really is kind of a tyrant, and he puts a kibosh to all those types of things that are going on. Doesn't want them doing that. Yes, Miss Annalie? Okay, well, very good. They found the book of the law in the temple, right? And that was during the days of which king? That's the days of Josiah, when Josiah was the king, right? And that's what caused all of the reforms. Very good. That's exactly right, Annalie. That's where they found it, in that temple. And then Nebuchadnezzar tore that temple down. And so now they need to rebuild the temple and put the temple back together. And they start to work on it, but it gets stalled. And so they don't finish it until God sends what prophet to them? Well, not Ezra. It's a good guess. All right, Haggai is sent to them saying, hey, it's time to get back to work. We'll put that in approximately 520 is when you'll have the Haggai coming back telling them, all right, guys, get back to work now. And anybody know when they finish? No. No. They finish in 516. So they finish the temple, and now when you get into 516 and beyond that, we've entered a period of time that's often referred to as Second Temple Judaism. Why do they call it Second Temple Judaism? Because it's the Second Temple, right? They're not very good at creative names. That's why. So it's Second Temple Judaism, and that's a name that you're going to hear me use a lot. I think it works better, especially when you talk about the period of time between the Testaments. I think Second Temple Judaism it's a better feel for what's going on than to just simply say the intertestamental period or the years of silence. Because in effect, or in actuality, there's a whole lot that's taking place. There's a lot of writings that are being done that may not be inspired, but there are significant events that are taking place. We're going to talk about some of these. There's a lot that's happening. Yes, we don't have any of that in our pages. We go straight from the end of Malachi straight to Matthew chapter 1, right? But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a lot taking place. So I tend to use the term Second Temple Judaism because that is, in effect, everything from 16 all the way to what point? Well, beyond Jesus' birth, right? What big event puts an end to the Second Temple Judaism? All right, what happened in AD 70? All right, that Second Temple's destroyed. So when the Second Temple is destroyed, now Second Temple Judaism is finished and it's completed. And it's important, I think, that we understand that. Judaism, we've stressed this, we've talked about this, especially in our Romans class, Galatians class and such. Judaism continues, right? All the way until that point. Even Christians could still be Jews, right? You know, they're mutually exclusive. It's not like you became a Christian, you ceased being a Jew. So, all of that to say, from 516 to AD 70, all of that time, this is the Second Temple period. Questions or comments on that concept or that idea? So, all right. So, Ezra. Let's get into Ezra because this is kind of important. By the way, can you see this back in the back? Am I losing my marker? All right. Maybe I wrote like really small and then asked if you could see it. Hold on, let me. Can you see that okay? All right, so Ezra chapters 1 through 6. By the way, Ezra really breaks down into two different sections of history. 1 through 6, chapters 1 through 6, are really recounting what? The temple. Who just said that? Joshua? That is exactly right. Chapters 1 through 6 are all about the return and then the rebuilding of the temple and everything that's concerned with that. How much of chapters 1 through 6 are written in the first person with first person pronouns? 0.0%. Yes, thank you, Isaac. That's correct. Because Ezra's not around in chapters 1 through 6. Ezra's not mentioned until what chapter? What'd you say? 7. Yes, exactly. Yes, that's right. Stephen nailed it. Yeah. Hopefully you caught the 1 through 6 and, chapter 7 then must be when he comes onto the scene. And so you have then chapters, this is all about the return and the temple. Chapter 7 through 10, Ezra returns. I can't talk and write at the same time. Hold on. All right, let's try this again. Ezra returns. He comes with other returnees. He brings funds with him to help solidify everything that's going on. And he solidifies himself as a spiritual leader among the people and charges them to live right by God. And so that's kind of what the book of Ezra really is all about. When you think of Ezra, think of the temple. First and foremost, Ezra is about the rebuilding of the temple. And then Ezra as a person, it's about his return and leading the people in that way. All right. By the way, we're going to have more to say. This isn't the only thing I'm saying about Ezra. But as far as just getting a feel for it, any questions or comments about this? Yeah, Joshua, do you have a question? Well, this is the last temple that's going to be built there in Jerusalem when they build this one. And it's going to be destroyed in AD 70 by the Romans. But it's not the last temple God builds, right? Jesus is considered a temple. The church is considered a temple. And really, the temple is a kind of a analogous metaphor, however you want to look at it. It's a type for what? For heaven itself, going all the way back, the garden imagery that runs throughout. Very good. So let's talk about Nehemiah real quick. By the way, I didn't give a date, did I? Ezra, let me make sure that my date in my head is the date that I have written down here. All right, so as we come out here, Ezra is, and by the way, everybody knows that my timeline is not to scale, right? So just take it for what it is. 458. 458 is the year of Ezra's return. So all of these events with the temple, all of that is way in the past. Ezra's return is about 458 or so. He's what, like 58 years afterwards? Someone who's good at math, you can make sure that my math was okay, because I could have easily messed that up. Nehemiah is going to be very close to that. And that's in 4. So these are the dates for the return of Ezra, the return of Nehemiah, about 14 years apart. They're contemporary with one another. In fact, we're going to see Ezra makes an appearance in Nehemiah. So Nehemiah comes onto the scene in 444. And who is Nehemiah, by the way? What's he do for a job? All right, he's the king's cupbearer. What's a cupbearer again? Okay, he bears cups, yes. A little more than that, though. Okay, what are you going to say, Annalie? Okay, so he's serving the king. Yeah, waiting for the king and serving the king. And as Isaac just said, he's kind of the taste tester. He's the one that tastes things, makes sure there's not poison in them. That's a pretty high level, pretty important job. Do they let just anybody be that person? No, you have to have a good relationship with the king himself, so that he knows you're not part of some type of conspiracy against him, or whatever the case might be. So Nehemiah serves as the cupbearer for the king, a pretty high-level job. And this is the story. We're not going to get into it. We will, by the way. I'm going to preach through the majority of Nehemiah sometime this year. And we're going to get into a lot of these details because it is really fascinating, and it's really good to make, I guess you could say, application evangelistically. This whole idea of the rebuilding project works really well for us as well. So I don't get into a ton of the details. But Nehemiah, he hears about life in Jerusalem, and he hears that everything is fantastic and amazing, right? It's all hunky-dory, yes. No, why? What's the problem? What's going on in Jerusalem? Okay, yeah, Bruce? All right, they're in a period of rebuilding, but that's kind of the problem. Are they rebuilding? No. In fact, what's going on with the walls? They're not there, right? The walls are still down. And, we don't have walled cities today, so maybe this doesn't hit us the same way that it would hit Nehemiah back in his day. But what does a walled city mean? All right, safety, protection. They didn't have airplanes. Paratroopers, that type of a thing. Walls were your main line of defense. And if you, as a sovereign, as a king, if you were unable to defend the people, what does that say about you? You're not a good king. All right, it's as much a status thing as it is a protection thing. Every major city had walls. Most minor cities had walls. Even smaller towns, typically speaking, had walls. And then here is Zion, Jerusalem, the place where God has placed his name. And does it have walls? No. The walls are still kind of there. They're just torn down. They're rubble. It's a disgrace. Now, why would Nehemiah perhaps assume that things should be all good and hunky-dory? Yeah, Annalie? Okay, because that's the problem. Yes, that there are no walls, right? Because God is yes. Hold on. What was that, Eliza? Okay, it was God's chosen place. What were you saying, Isaac? Okay, they had returned, but what? All right. There's a passage that I thought you guys would have thrown out immediately because I think we've talked about it the last few Sunday nights that talked about when they returned from the land. Anybody? Deuteronomy chapter 30, right? What does it say in Deuteronomy chapter 30? When they return, when he brings them back, what's God going to do with this people? All right, bless them abundantly, prosper them even more than their fathers. But it's all conditioned on the statement, if you return to the Lord with what? With all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind or might, right? In other words, where do we talked about this last week. Hopefully it's starting to kick back in. Where else do we find that language? In the Shema, Deuteronomy chapter 6, says this is how you're supposed to live. And if you stray away from it, you'll be punished, but don't worry, you won't stay in that punishment because God will bring you back so that you can what? Live the Shema, right? Live, serve, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. This is vitally important for understanding why Nehemiah, not just Nehemiah, Daniel himself, Daniel's great prayer in Daniel chapter 9 had the exact same reasoning behind it. That they look at the fact that for Daniel it's been this amount of time, shouldn't we be returning? For Nehemiah, he looks back and says, we should be blessed abundantly beyond what they were, and yet this is the state of things. That's what spurs Nehemiah and gets him going. So Nehemiah goes back for the purpose of restoring the walls, and just like with Ezra, he is going to charge the people to live right by God and do the right thing. All right. Now, all of this, Ezra, Nehemiah, you have Esther, Ezra, Nehemiah, and what other writings are chronologically at the end of the Old Testament? Chronicles, yes. All right. Well, now it's just confusing. What else? Malachi, all right. Ezra and Nehemiah. All of these are contemporary with each other. What I said, we're at the end right now. In fact, it's theorized, and I happen to buy into this, that the shape of the Old Testament, at least in the Hebrew Bible, the way that they would have understood it, the shape of the Old Testament was finalized in this time period, in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. In this time period, this is where the editorial marks come into play. Have you ever noticed just editorial marks throughout all of the pages that we've been looking at and reading? Namely, how do we know what happened to Moses? The book. What book? All right. Deuteronomy, right? Jonathan said the book that who wrote? The book that Moses wrote tells us about Moses' death and about the fact that even to this day, we don't what? Yeah, we don't know where the body is, right? Even to this day. What day? Yeah, what do you want to say, Annalie? Okay. All right. Well, bear in mind, somebody wrote that note, right? Somebody said, even to this day, we don't know where that body is found. Who wrote that note? I would suggest it was probably some of these people here. Now, that is not to say that these people wrote the Bible. And I'm not suggesting that these people in this day wrote the books of Moses or the Pentateuch, right? But these are, I think, the people that when you see these notes and you see that phrase, to this day, a lot of times when you see it, it's these people who did the final editing process and compiled things in certain ways that made these notations in various ways. That's not to say every single one of them. Some of them very well could have been earlier done by someone else, but I think the final shape of what you read, at least the Hebrew Bible as we understand it, was put into its finality here. The Psalms, we talked about this in our Psalms class. 5 books that are compiled into one Psalter. Who did the compilation? Who put it together? Who did all of that? I think it's done during this time. Is that to say that they wrote all of the Psalms? No, of course not. But they're the ones who took the task upon themselves to bring things to an end. That is a theory that I think holds an awful lot of weight. It makes an awful lot of sense for us to see it that way. So during the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, and by the way, they use first-person pronouns. Ezra and Nehemiah, I don't think there's any problem with understanding that they are the ones who wrote their books. But you see during this time, a lot of the compilation comes, or at least the Old Testament stuff. All right, questions on that? By the way, I also think that's why the Chronicles are written during this time frame by these people. Because they are privy to every bit of information that leads up to this point. They've read through it all. They know the king's accounts. They know that they went into captivity. They know they've come out of captivity. They're here now at the spiritual restoration of the people of Israel. The temple is rebuilt. The walls are rebuilt. They are working on a new spiritual focus moving forward, in which they actually do a pretty good job of turning the page. Never again is Israel going to go into what? Well, captivity. I mean, though, never again will Israel turn to what? Oh, they'll turn to God, but they won't turn to foreign gods, idols. That's just, go ahead and put your hand down there, Joshua. That's just not going to be an issue from this point on. When you get to the New Testament, are the Israelites, the Jews, are they a bunch of idolaters? No, they're done with that. They do a great job. That has a lot to do with this period of time right here. Once they get on the other side of captivity, they read everything and they say, wow, here's how our forefathers messed it up. We're not doing that again. You get to both Ezra and Nehemiah, in which they have a strong focus on what with the foreign wives that they've brought in. What do? They send them away, right? And they say, this is the problem that we had all the way from the beginning up till here. This is the issue, is that we kept bringing foreign intermingling with all of the foreign people and their pagan idols, and it brought us into idolatry, and they put a stop to it. And they said, no more. We're going to start fresh. We're going to start new. We're going to live according to the law. And they do it. I'm not saying they're perfect, but they've turned a page. And you're not going to read through the Judges and say, wow, that sounds a whole lot like the Second Temple Jewish period, right? You just won't. Because it's not the same. Things are drastically different now from what they have been. All right. Ezra as an individual, look at Ezra chapter 7 and verse 6. And it describes the man Ezra here. Ezra chapter 7 and verse 6. So it's a list of people who came from Babylon. It talks about Ezra. He was a scribe skilled in the law of Moses, which the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. And the king had granted him everything he requested because the hand of the Lord his God was on him. All right, so here's your description of Ezra the man. Pretty good? Is he all right? Yeah, it doesn't get much better than this one, right? Here it says about him, he was skilled in all the law of Moses, which the Lord God had given, and the hand of the Lord his God was on him. And you have just the way that he's esteemed throughout the rest of Ezra, even into Nehemiah, like in Nehemiah chapter 8, when Ezra is brought out, he comes out to read the law for the people, and the way that people reverentially treat the law. A lot of that has to do with Ezra and who he is. Nehemiah as an individual, we talked about his response in Nehemiah chapter 1, right? He hears that things are bad in Jerusalem. What could he have said? Yeah, they've got a lot of people. Man, they should be doing a better job. I really hope someone comes along and takes care of this situation, right? Instead, what does he do? I know it's not fair. We haven't read Nehemiah chapter 1. But instead, he goes in repentance and prays to God. A prayer of repentance for the people of Israel. That's the type of guy that he is. And then, when he gets the opportunity, he goes back and takes care of the problem himself. All right. With our remaining few minutes here, I want to talk about, I'm just going to list a few themes, and then we're going to close. Kelly's going to lead us in a song here in just a moment. And if you want, we don't have it on, you're going to have to use, is it 675? It's up there. 674, I was close. It's like you with 217 earlier, right? Just off by one. That's the way it is, yeah. All right, so I'm going to sing this song in just a moment. It is Time to Build, which is, by the way, all about this. All right, it's all about the building projects. And very specifically why I asked for that song to be the latest one that we learned, because it ties in so well with the building projects that we have before us. And that's really the first theme that I want to stress. It is time to build. That's the theme that you have in both of these places. So I think that's readily apparent. We don't have time to really discuss these. I'm just going to kind of throw these out. But I would also say it is time to build the community. It's not just enough that you're building the temple and building the walls, but that you are rebuilding and reestablishing who God's people are in a way that they haven't been established in a very, very long time. And so a key theme of both of these is reestablishing the people as they're supposed to be. Another theme that you find is that of prayer. By the way, with the time to build the community, Ezra chapters 9 and 10 focus on that. Nehemiah chapters 7 through 13. That's a major portion outside of just building the temple, building the walls, but building the community. As far as prayers, Ezra chapter 9 talks about a prayer of repentance. And then Nehemiah chapter 1, mentioned that just a minute ago, also a prayer of repentance, a prayer of confession. So you find those types of prayers in both of those places. Another major theme is overcoming obstacles. In both of these places, Ezra chapter 4 and then Nehemiah, particularly obstacles from outside, the nations around them that don't want them to succeed, that try to stop. Nehemiah chapters 2, 4, 5, 6. You have Sanballat, Tobiah, these guys that are just causing all kinds of problems throughout. So that is a major theme. And even sometimes obstacles from within. In Nehemiah, I think chapter 3 and maybe 5 describe problems that were coming from inside the group as well. I mentioned this a second ago, and this could be part of building the community, but dealing with improper marriages, that is marriage, intermarrying with the pagans, which means in this context, intermarrying with the pagan gods. It's, yes, literally with the women as it's described, but them bringing their gods with them, I think, is the point behind dissolving these particular marriages. And then, in concluding, I think a very key way of looking at this is application. For our own application, I think there is a strong evangelistic application that can be pulled from this, the idea of building. To that end, Kelly, you want to come up and lead a song for us? Number 674. If you guys want to pull out your songbooks. So maybe you already did when I mentioned it earlier. I guess I have already said this. So number 674, we're going to sing It Is Time to Build. And then, let's see, Richard, you still... Okay, so after we sing this, I'll just have one or two more remarks, and then we'll close our discussion with a prayer. So, I'll turn it over to Kelly.
Let's sing together. It is time to build in the church of our Lord. It is time to consider our ways. This great work is before us. The need sounds its cry to all, and God seeketh those who obey. Now have courage. Says our Lord, I am with you, my spirit abides with you. Now have courage, I will fill it with glory, build the church, build the temple of God. Have we built our homes homes have we cared for our own, while neglecting the temple of God. But it's time, let us work, giving all to our blessed Lord, ye chosen, ye people of God. Now have courage, says our Lord, I am with you, my spirit abides with you. Now have courage, I will fill it with glory, build the church, build the temple of God. Let us gather wood in the mountains of truth, hammer faith, hammer hope to his frame. Now with strength in our hands, for the work sounds the word now as we stand on the power of his name. Now have courage, says our Lord, I am with you, my spirit abides with you. Now have courage, I will fill it with glory, build the church, build the temple of God.
Ellie? It is time to build. And with that, that really brings us to the conclusion of what we call the Old Testament. We've already talked about the prophets. We're going to take I believe, what I have in my head, a quick excursus and run through the wisdom literature briefly. But from there, we're going to get into that Second Temple period of time. And there's some interesting history, some interesting writings, and other things to look at before we enter into what we call the New Testament. So, questions or comments from anybody? What, Joshua? You know one of the things I just said? Oh, okay. All right, we'll save it until we get there. All right. Very good. All right, why don't we then close with a prayer together, if you'll bow with me. Our Father in heaven, you are magnificent. It is simply amazing that we can go to your word, we can start in the very beginning, and we can see how this greater story unfolds. And we're able to see how all of it fits together with so many different authors in different times, different cultural settings, and yet we see this one story and how it leads to your Son. It is absolutely amazing. And we thank you that you have allowed us to be the recipients of the grace that's given through Jesus our Lord. Help us as we leave here, that we will take with us a spirit of building, a desire to serve you, a desire to please you in our lives, and to live to the praise of your glory. We thank you for Jesus, for the sacrifice that gives us hope, and it is through Jesus we now pray. Amen.